Siding with President Obama, FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler now says federal regulators will reclassify internet service so that it can be regulated like a utility and allow the agency to set new rules of the road known as net neutrality. The agency is going to vote on the proposal later this month, setting up a high-stakes standoff with the telecom industry. Joining us now in a first on CNBC interview, FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai. Now, Ajit, you've been against Title II reclassification for internet, but Tom Wheeler has said FCC can make some tweaks to it to make it work the way it should. How do you feel about this proposal? Some cable stocks were up yesterday on this news.
Well, I think what people have been reacting to is a spin about what the plan is. We haven't yet seen it, however, and the devil is going to be in the details. We do know it is going to involve, as you suggested, Title II regulation of the internet. And I'm opposed to President Obama's plan for internet regulation precisely because it is going to make for slower broadband for Americans, will increase their internet bills, and ultimately will reduce competition and innovation in the broadband marketplace.
Ajit, it does appear, though, that there is a burden on internet service providers just in the basics of what we've seen in the last couple days. But there's some who are watching the cable industry and saying, it could have been worse. Where is the burden, and how strict, in your opinion, is it actually when it comes down to those details?
There are two separate problems here. The first is that we don't know what the plan is. President Obama's plan to regulate the internet is hidden from public view. In fact, the American public is not going to be able to see it until the FCC actually adopts it in 3 weeks. That's a problem because here, the uncertainty that's going to surround the internet economy is going to persist for some time. Secondly, what we do know about Title II is that it is heavy-handed regulation that will shut a lot of small and independent entrepreneurs out of the business altogether. And for those that remain, it will apply the rules that were developed for railroad monopolies of the 19th century into a very competitive marketplace in the 21st century. The question is, do you want to bring Ma Bell back to life in the digital age? I certainly don't, and that's why I don't want to treat the broadband marketplace today as if it were a monopoly.
On that note, Ajit, it had been reported that some other commissioners were taken aback by Wheeler's stance in that op-ed. Were you?
Well, I think the writing had been on the wall since President Obama formally proposed his plan to regulate the internet in November. And I think at that point, the independence of the agency was severely compromised. And what you saw, unfortunately, yesterday was a formerly independent agency capitulating to political pressure to solve a problem that simply doesn't exist.
Wow, that's kind of harsh criticism for a house that you live in.
Well, unfortunately, the independence of the agency, if you look at the Wall Street Journal article that described how we got to this path, makes clear that some of the independent voices at the agency had a different view of things. And I think there was some room for the agency to take an objective look at this. But once political actors inject political considerations into our decision-making process, then essentially you would make the agency an extension of the political branches. And that's an unfortunate place to be, especially when we're talking about a very dynamic part of the marketplace where regulation historically has been restrained.
Well, Ajit, we've got in broadband something that almost everybody uses nowadays, and almost everybody feels like they're paying too much for it, and the customer service isn't that great. I mean, it's set up for this situation where people want regulation. How, at this point, do you make an argument for more market-based activity, for more competition versus more regulation?
You've put your finger on the key question. When I've traveled and I've talked to startups in Kalamazoo, Michigan, I've talked to consumers in College Station, Texas, when they say net neutrality, what their real concern is about competition. They want more choices at better prices. The problem is Title II regulation gets you in precisely the opposite direction. Title II was designed for monopolies. And part of the problem is that a lot of the would-be competitors who want to enter this space and to increase their investment in networks are going to be less likely to do that if they have to deal with common carrier rules. And so I've proposed a number of different ways for us to get at that problem by removing some of the barriers to deploying broadband infrastructure, which is very difficult and time-consuming and expensive, by bringing more spectrum into the commercial marketplace for mobile broadband. Those are the types of market-oriented solutions that would solve the problem that I think most people are concerned about when they use the slogan net neutrality. Unfortunately, Title II takes us in precisely the opposite direction. And you only need to go to Europe and make the comparison to the utility-style regulation Europe has to see that the broadband marketplace in America is superior. And I would argue it's superior precisely because of the long-standing bipartisan commitment to light touch regulation.
But at this point, Commissioner, is it irrelevant to be so critical of what appears to already be done? How many changes at this point do you expect to be able to make to a plan that Mr. Wheeler appears to have already put together?
Well, I certainly hope that over the next 3 weeks, before the vote is formally taken, that the chairman and my fellow commissioners will be open to a dialogue. And I think that if they are apprised of all the facts, for example, the comparison between the U.S. with its free market approach and Europe with its utility approach, they'll come to see things my way. And in addition to that, there are a lot of legal hurdles that we will have to cross if the president's plan to regulate the internet is passed. That's going to embroil us in years of wasteful litigation, create a lot of uncertainty for the internet economy, and hopefully that is a factor that will play into my colleagues' considerations as well.
It'll be a busy 3 weeks indeed. Commissioner, before we let you go, the thing that the market is trying to parse, in addition to what exactly these rules look like, is what it means for some of the deals that are on the table. Comcast's purchase of Time Warner, of course, Comcast being our parent company here at CNBC. Any take on what this means for a deal that large and that would be very meaningful to the market?
Unfortunately, because those transactions are pending before the FCC, I can't comment either on them or on what effect other proceedings like net neutrality might have on them. I'm focused solely on the effect that this particular net neutrality proposal that the president has outlined will have on the overall broadband ecosystem. And I'll evaluate each transaction on the merits when the time comes.
Well, we want it better, faster, cheaper. We'll see if regulation will get us there. FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.